Keanu Reeves had always been discreet in his routines. Every night, at the same time, he stopped by the small 24-hour market to buy something simple. But that night, something made him pause. Across the checkout, an elderly employee finished her shift, holding a small bag and exiting through the side door. He had seen her before, always leaving late at night, but this time something was different. Her tired eyes, hurried steps, the way she clutched the bag as if it were something precious. The moment Keanu watched her turn the corner, he felt a tightness in his chest, and without knowing exactly why, he decided to follow her. But what he was about to discover would bring tears to your eyes. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Nighttime in Los Angeles has a rhythm of its own. The streets, bustling with honking cars and hurried footsteps during the day, now settle into a deep silence, interrupted only by distant sirens or the occasional echo of lone footsteps on the pavement. Keanu Reeves never cared much for Hollywood glamour. He always preferred the quiet of simple moments, the everyday routines that kept him connected to a life outside the spotlight. One of those small rituals was his late-night trip to a 24-hour market, a habit that allowed him a brief escape into normalcy. He would walk in unnoticed, pick up some fruit, a bottle of water, maybe a quick snack, nothing extravagant, just the essentials. He liked the feeling of blending in, of experiencing life as just another person passing through the city at night. But tonight felt different. There was an employee he always saw at the market, an older woman with greying hair, slightly crooked glasses, and a look of exhaustion permanently etched onto her face. She wore a simple uniform and spent most of her shift stocking shelves or mopping the floor. Keanu had never paid much attention to her, not because he didn't care, but because she had become part of the background, always there, always working, quiet and unassuming, until tonight. As he entered the store, something about her caught his eye. She held a small plastic bag in her hands, walking slower than usual. Her shoulders sagged, not just with fatigue, but with a heaviness that seemed to go beyond physical exhaustion. Her steps were slow, almost dragging. Then she exited through the side door, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Keanu paid for his groceries and walked out of the market like he always did. But tonight, for some reason he couldn't quite understand, his mind kept drifting back to that elderly woman walking alone into the night. Something inside him told him this night was different. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that woman carried a weight far heavier than the plastic bag in her hands. Keanu had spent the entire day trying to ignore the strange feeling lingering from the night before. He had seen that elderly woman countless times at the market, but for the first time he realized he had never once thought about her beyond those walls. He had never wondered where she went after her shift, what her life looked like outside of that store, and now that thought wouldn't leave him alone. That night, he returned to the market at the same time as always, and there she was again. But this time he paid attention. She worked just as she always did, restocking shelves with mechanical movements, sweeping the floor with her head slightly lowered. But now he noticed the little things, the way she sighed when she thought no one was looking, the way her shoulders seemed to sag a little more as the hours passed. Then midnight struck. She picked up her small plastic bag, gave a brief farewell to the cashier, and walked out through the side door. Keanu made his way toward the exit, but instead of heading home as usual, he hesitated. He watched. She wore a green blouse, slightly worn but well kept. The fabric hung loosely on her thin frame, a body weighed down by years of exhaustion. This time, he noticed something he hadn't the night before. She didn't catch a bus, she didn't hail a cab, she didn't even glance around for a car. She just started walking. Keanu, who stood on the sidewalk watching her disappear into the night, noticed something strange about the way she walked. Her steps were slow, not in the way of someone enjoying a peaceful evening stroll, but of someone burdened by something heavier than mere fatigue. She clutched the plastic bag tightly, as if carrying something precious. He waited for her to turn a corner and stop at a bus stop or wave down a taxi, but that never happened. The elderly woman just kept walking. And in that moment, Keanu made a decision. Without thinking, he started following her. He kept a safe distance, not wanting to startle her. He didn't even fully understand why he was doing this. All he knew was that he couldn't look away. She walked without hesitation, as if heading somewhere specific. The streets around them were still somewhat active, with bars and convenience stores open. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and the distant hum of traffic filled the quiet night air. But as she kept walking, the surroundings began to change. The wide avenues were soon replaced by narrower streets. The bright storefronts gave way to buildings worn down by time. The sound of traffic faded into the background until all that remained was the steady rhythm of her footsteps on the pavement. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. This woman wasn't heading home. She was going somewhere else, somewhere he didn't understand. And with every step she took, he became more certain that something was very, very wrong. Keanu kept a safe distance as the woman walked through the dark streets, but the farther she went, the more he realized that something was seriously wrong. Keanu kept expecting the elderly woman to stop at a bus stop or for a car to pull up and pick her up. But that never happened. She just kept walking, and as she walked, the world around her began to change. The bright, well-lit streets of the city centre faded into dimly lit roads. Streetlights became more sparse, casting uneven shadows across the pavement. The tall, modern buildings were replaced by older structures with peeling facades, worn down by time. The city's late-night buzz began to quiet. Soon there were only a few scattered figures wandering the sidewalks. The sound of traffic faded into the distance, replaced by nothing but the steady rhythm of the woman's footsteps on the pavement. Keanu kept his distance, making sure she didn't notice him. She held the plastic bag close to her chest as if protecting something precious. Her exhaustion was clear, but she didn't stop. With every block she passed, Keanu's chest tightened. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but something inside him told him that this wasn't just an ordinary walk home. This wasn't just a commute. This was survival. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, the woman finally stopped. Keanu, staying hidden in the shadows, watched as she approached a small, run-down trailer parked next to an empty lot. The metal exterior was rusted in places, worn down by time and neglect. A single dim light flickered from inside. She hesitated at the door for a brief moment, taking a deep breath before pushing it open and stepping inside. Keanu carefully moved closer, making sure not to make a sound. He stopped a few feet away, peering through the small window. What he saw made his stomach drop. Inside the trailer, 2 small children lay on a thin mattress on the floor. The space was tiny, almost bare except for a few worn-out blankets and a small table pressed against the wall. The elderly woman reached into the plastic bag and pulled out a single piece of bread and a small container of thin soup. The children immediately sat up, their eyes lighting up with hunger. She smiled at them, masking her own exhaustion, and carefully divided the food into smaller portions. There was no luxury, no abundance, just enough to keep them from going to bed hungry, at least for tonight. And then Keanu understood everything. She wasn't just coming home after a long shift, she was fighting to keep those children alive. Keanu felt a lump in his throat. He had always known there was inequality in the world, but seeing it up close with his own eyes was something else entirely. And in that moment he knew he couldn't just walk away. Keanu stood there in the darkness, still watching through the trailer's window. The elderly woman sat beside the children, smiling at them as if everything was fine. But Keanu could see beyond the smile. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the slight tremble in her fingers as she held the spoon, the way she pretended not to be hungry while watching the children eat. She wasn't eating. She was just watching her grandchildren eat. Keanu felt a lump in his throat. It was a quiet scene, without words, but full of meaning. This woman spent endless hours working in a grocery store, cleaning, stocking shelves, always greeting customers with a polite smile, and yet, at the end of the day, she returned home without enough food for everyone. Keanu had always known about inequality. He had donated to countless charities, supported numerous causes. He knew millions of people struggled to survive every single day. But this wasn't a documentary, a news report, or a statistic. This was real. The woman he saw every night at the market, the one so many customers overlooked, was out here sacrificing her own meal just so two little children wouldn't go to bed hungry, and no one knew, no one saw. Keanu took a few steps back from the trailer, inhaling deeply. The cold night air felt heavier now. He ran a hand over his face, trying to process what he had just witnessed. That night, Keanu went home, but he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight in his chest that he couldn't ignore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman's tired smile, the children's hungry eyes, and the thin soup in the plastic bag. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that small piece of bread being divided. He saw the woman holding back her tears, pretending she was satisfied just by watching her grandchildren eat. The scene haunted him. Keanu had always believed that a single act of kindness could change someone's life, but this situation was far bigger than just buying her a meal. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about a cruel reality that should never exist. And he knew that he couldn't walk away from this. He had to do something. Keanu lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen. He had to act, and soon. The next morning, Keanu woke up with a sense of urgency he couldn't shake. The images from the night before, the elderly woman, the small trailer, the hungry children. He had spent years helping people through charities and donations, but this felt personal. This was no longer a distant problem. It was right in front of him, and he needed to understand it. So instead of following his usual routine, Keanu found himself back at the 24-hour market that afternoon. He walked inside, scanning the aisles. The woman, Dona Marta, as he had overheard the cashier call her, wasn't working yet, but he didn't come to see her. He came for answers. Keanu approached the front counter where the store manager stood, checking inventory. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "I was wondering if I could ask you something about one of your employees." The manager looked up, blinking in surprise. He recognized Keanu instantly, but kept his professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask about Dona Marta," Keanu continued. "She's been working here for a long time, right?" The manager hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yes, she has. More than 10 years, I believe. She's one of our most dedicated employees. Always on time, never complains, works extra shifts whenever she can." Keanu studied the man's expression. "And how much does she make?" The manager's polite demeanor faltered slightly. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "She earns minimum wage, standard for part-time employees." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And benefits? Healthcare?" The manager sighed. "She's not eligible for full benefits. She only works part-time, so she doesn't qualify." A bitter taste filled Keanu's mouth. Dona Marta worked every night, every hour she could, yet she wasn't even given enough hours to receive benefits. Keanu left the store, feeling a weight in his chest. He stepped outside, the sun bright overhead, but all he could think about was the small, dimly lit trailer from the night before. This woman had given everything. She wasn't supposed to be working herself to the bone at this stage in her life. She wasn't supposed to be skipping meals so 2 children could eat, and yet no one was helping her. Keanu clenched his fists. He had seen a lot in his lifetime. He had encountered struggle, loss, pain, but this wasn't just sad. It was unacceptable, and he already knew what he had to do. Keanu walked away from the store, his mind racing. He had made his decision, but first he needed to speak to Dona Marta personally. Keanu returned to the market that night, but this time he didn't go inside. He stood near a lamppost across the street, blending into the quiet night as he observed the store's entrance. He didn't want to interfere or make her uncomfortable. He just wanted to understand. A little after midnight, the side door opened, and Dona Marta stepped out. She wore the same faded green blouse, the fabric hanging loosely over her frail shoulders. In her hands, she carried the usual small plastic bag, clutching it close to her chest as she started walking. Keanu didn't follow her this time. Instead, he took a deep breath and approached, gently walking a few steps ahead before stopping near a vending machine by the sidewalk. He made sure his posture was relaxed, non-threatening, as if he had just casually found himself there. Then, as she passed by, he spoke softly. "Good evening, Dona Marta." She stopped, startled. Her tired eyes blinked up at him in surprise, taking a moment to recognize his face. "Oh, good evening, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice polite but hesitant. Keanu smiled lightly. "Please, just Keanu," he corrected gently. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to say hello. I see you here every night, and I figured it was time I introduced myself properly." Dona Marta hesitated but nodded. "That's very kind of you," she said, adjusting the bag in her hands. I do see you around too, but I never wanted to disturb you." "You wouldn't have," Keanu reassured her. "But I get it. I like my quiet time too." She gave a small smile, though there was a wariness behind it, as if she wasn't used to people taking the time to talk to her. Keanu glanced at the bag in her hands and hesitated for a moment before speaking again, keeping his tone casual, not intrusive. "You work so late. It must be exhausting." Dona Marta exhaled softly. "It is," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you do what you have to do, don't you?" Keanu nodded slowly, feeling the weight in her words. "Yeah, I guess we all do." A pause. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but in that moment it was just the two of them standing under the dim glow of the streetlight. Dona Marta adjusted her bag again, looking as though she was about to leave. Keanu didn't want to pressure her, but something inside him told him he couldn't just walk away. So he chose his words carefully. "I know I don't know much about you," he said gently, "but if you ever need anything, sometimes it helps to have someone looking out for you." Dona Marta stiffened slightly. For a brief second, Keanu worried he had said too much, but then she let out a quiet, almost tired chuckle. "That's kind of you, Keanu." Her voice was warm but guarded, as if she wasn't used to receiving kindness with no strings attached. She looked up at him one last time before giving him a small nod. "It was nice talking to you, but I should get home." Keanu didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded back. "Have a good night, Dona Marta." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark streets. Keanu stayed there for a moment, watching her go, his chest heavy with thoughts. He didn't push her. He didn't ask too much, but now she knew. She knew that someone had noticed her, and somehow Keanu knew this wasn't the last time they would talk. Keanu exhaled, watching as Dona Marta disappeared into the night. He hadn't asked for much, but he had opened a door, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Keanu lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His conversation with Dona Marta kept replaying in his mind. Her tired smile, the way she clutched her small plastic bag, the exhaustion in her voice when she admitted that she simply did what she had to do. She had been polite, but he could tell she didn't expect anyone to help her. She had been carrying everything alone for so long that she had stopped hoping for a different life. Keanu had met many people in his lifetime, actors, directors, celebrities, politicians. He had seen fame, wealth, and luxury, but few people had humbled him the way she did. Because Dona Marta wasn't asking for help. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was just surviving. And that was what made Keanu's decision so easy. He wasn't going to walk away. The next morning, Keanu took action, but he didn't want to simply give her money. He had seen too many stories of temporary solutions, cash that ran out, donations that didn't solve the real problem. Dona Marta didn't just need a paycheck. She needed stability. She needed a home. And so Keanu quietly started making arrangements. He spent the day reaching out to people he trusted, real estate agents, community organizers, charity workers. He didn't want something grand or flashy. He wanted something real, something that would feel like home. After hours of searching, he found it. A small house, modest but fully furnished, in a safe neighborhood close to schools where the children could grow up without worry, a place where Dona Marta wouldn't have to walk for miles after a long shift, a place where she could finally breathe. Keanu handled everything quietly. He made sure the house would be paid off, that the utilities would be covered for as long as necessary. He even arranged for a small trust fund so she would never have to worry about food on the table. No publicity, no cameras, no headlines. Just a man who had seen someone struggling and refused to do nothing. That night, Keanu returned to the market. Dona Marta was finishing her shift when he arrived, stepping out into the cold air with her usual small plastic bag in hand. She noticed him standing there and gave a tired but genuine smile. "Keanu, what a surprise." He smiled back. "Hey, Dona Marta, got a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I don't want to overwhelm you," he said gently, "but I know life has been hard, and I want to help." Dona Marta's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "Keanu, He handed her the envelope. "Just open it," he encouraged softly. With slightly trembling hands, she unfolded the paper. Inside, her breath hitched. Her eyes moved over the words again and again, as if trying to convince herself that it was real. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes. She covered her mouth, her whole body trembling. This is for me," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "Now you have a home, Dona Marta. A real home." For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply stood there, her frail hands gripping the paper, shaking with emotion. Then she burst into quiet sobs, her whole body racked with gratitude. Keanu stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." Dona Marta looked up at him, eyes glistening, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked like she truly believed it. The next day, Keanu went to see the house with her and the children. The moment the kids stepped inside, they ran through the rooms, laughing, touching the walls, jumping on the beds, as if they couldn't believe it was real. Dona Marta stood at the door, hands over her chest, looking around in disbelief. She turned to Keanu, her eyes still red from crying. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smiled. "You don't have to." Because he hadn't done it for gratitude. He had done it because it was right. Because sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence. And because when you finally see those who are invisible to the world, you have the power to change everything. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.